Now, I don't have a thumbnail made for this video yet, so that's what we'll be doing in this video, and I want to go through a couple basics with how to make a thumbnail in GIMP because people have been having a hard time doing that. Let me make this full screen here. There we go. So first off, when you want to make a thumbnail, first you gotta get the size and proportions right. So what you're gonna go is you're gonna go to File, New, and that's gonna come up with this box. Now generally it starts out with 1920 by 1080, but if you already have an image open, like right here, it will default to the current size of the canvas. So if we had an image open that is like this, 3000 by 3000, it would change. So I'm going to set this at 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high, and this gives us a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And I'm going to make this real quick. And so it gives us this square, which you might recognize. This is the same aspect ratio that a lot of phones use, a lot of monitors use, and this 1920 by 1080 is HD, and this is the same aspect ratio of what YouTube recommends for its thumbnails. And it doesn't have to be this size, it can be any size really, as long as it is 16 by 9. Let me do this. Okay, so using the crop tool, allow growing, there we go. So it can be, this canvas can be any size as long as it's pretty much this aspect ratio. So we can make it bigger, we could make it a lot smaller, it could be this big, it could be all this small, like 590 by 340 or whatever. It doesn't really matter as long as the aspect ratio is 16 by 9. And if you don't know what that is in pixels, I'll throw some up on the screen some resolutions up on the screen right now, and pick and choose what works best for you. But for today and this demonstration, I'm going to be using a 1920 by 1080 canvas size. Now, there are a couple things that make a good thumbnail, and one of them is having a large, generally recognizable image or face in the thumbnail. So, like if I was famous, obviously this isn't me, this guy looks way too good, but like if this was me, I would have my face be fairly large in the thumbnail, maybe with some really cool reaction face. You can change stuff. You can change the image by using the scale tool, move tool, move him around. If you don't like which side you're facing, you can use the flip tool. Look good over here. Now, a couple things you want to know is I have this red border right here. You don't really want to place anything too important in this red border. So no text should be going outside, no logos unless you want them kind of hanging in from the side. Generally, that is not a good place to put stuff. Also, before I forget, generally, especially on mobile, this whole chunk roughly right here is gonna be covered up by the timestamp. So they'll have a little black box with white text that says hey, this guy's video is 10 minutes and 32 seconds long. Let's make this smaller. So maybe like 75. Yeah, there we go. 19 minutes and 32 seconds long. And this will be just kind of hanging out in the corner here, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change which side, but you can keep it in mind when you're designing your thumbnail. It's gonna be there, so don't put any important text back here. So don't put important text. Let's make this white. So yeah, don't put like important text back here because it is going to get covered up by the timestamp right there. So that's something to keep in mind. Moving on to text. There are a couple of problems I see a lot of people have. Bad text placement is one of them, where like the top of the letters is being cut off so you can't read it very well. This goes for both like cutting off the top, or if this was towards the bottom, cutting off the bottom. Let's hide these other layers real quick. So this would be bad placement, kind of having it run off, having letters cut off by the border, and generally putting text in this red kind of border. You can get away with it sometimes, but this is where you're gonna have a hard time seeing, you know, where the thumbnail ends and where the user interface begins. Generally, just keep it inside this white area. And if you're wondering, for a 1920 by 1080 thumbnail, this red strip is about 21 pixels wide. So if you want, you can just go ahead, add guides at 21 or 20, whatever works for you. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but it is a good idea to keep that in mind. Text that is too small, when you keep in mind, the thumbnail is gonna be like that big on desktop, and it's gonna be like, what, that big on mobile. So you really have to make text large, and it can't be really small like this. Otherwise, people won't be able to read it. Another problem is too big text. Like, this is just running all over the place. As you can see, it comes out all the way over here. Just make it smaller. Maybe make it like 400 and then move it. And that's a good size text. You can read it out here, but it's not too large. It's not running all over the place. Another thing you want to avoid is unreadable text. So certain script fonts, we'll get into fonts a bit later, but stuff like cursive or handwritten style fonts, they don't really work great when it comes to readability, especially when they have these really thin lines. It's really beautiful to look at, but once you take a step back, you just have a hard time reading them, as opposed to a simpler font. So those are some things to keep in mind. So as a short recap, bad placement, don't make sure your letters aren't being cut off, make sure it's big enough for you to read it, make sure that people can read it from a distance and they're not like squinting, because they aren't going to click on your video if they have to stop and figure out what the thumbnail says, or if they have to kind of figure it out on their own. It should be readily apparent. And don't make the text, finally, don't make the text too large. So again, I doubt you're going to run into this problem, but it does occur sometimes. Just make sure everything's readable and actually, generally speaking, within this little red box. Next up we have fonts. A couple differences is between the fonts are serif and non-serif. Now, first off, I should probably explain what a font is. You see how all these words look different. Basically, a font is the look of the text. So, like this is an S, this whole thing is text, and how it looks is a font. This particular font is serif, this one is Tahoma, this one is these four actually are Times New Roman. So those are font names. GIMP has a ton of fonts, so it has this fonts window. If you don't have this docked somewhere, you can go to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and then come all the way down here to Fonts and just click on that. And as you can see, it's already right here. So each one of these is a font. So this is a font. So we can change this maybe to Arial, Bandskrift, Bell MT. Those are all different fonts that change how it looks, and different fonts may be more ideal for what you are trying to accomplish than others. Let's just delete that there. So a couple differences. First you have serif fonts and non-serif fonts. Basically, for serif fonts, the difference between serif and non-serif is that they have these little things called serifs. Now, what is a serif? Well, I'll show you here in just a moment. So, over here on this word serif, you can see these little, pointy bits that are coming off the ends of the S, back of the R, these little bases for like the RI and F, back of the I. Those are called serifs. They're little pointy thingies. And the difference between a serif and a non-serif is serif has serifs and non-serif fonts do not have serifs. So as you notice, no pointy bits on the ends. It's all pretty flat and sleek and modern. I personally like non-serif fonts more than serif fonts, but it depends on your channel, and maybe you need a serif font, maybe you need a non-serif font. It is totally up to you, and you can change it whenever you want. Now, moving on, we've got different options for each font. So let's say you've selected your font. Maybe it's Times New Roman for this example. So you've got normal Times New Roman. That's what a lot of people use. And then you have bold. This makes the characters, so these letters are characters, they make them thicker, a bit beefier. They're easier to read and see at long distances, or when they're really small. They also call attention to themselves, so if you want to really drive a point home, you can use a bold font. Italic kind of slants all the characters to one side, generally the right. I don't know of any that slant to the left, but who knows, there probably is some. That's more of a hand script version of a font, if you will. This can also be used to call emphasis, although it is just slightly harder to read at large distances. And then finally, not all fonts have these options, but there's also bold italic, which is a combination of the thickness of the bold along with the slant of the italic, and this can be used to call emphasis to whatever you're trying to say. So now that that is out of the way, the text tool, press T. There's also this little A over here to use it. So in order to use it, left click and drag, and then you can type. Obviously that's just gibberish, so these are words, for an example, not words, words. And then this is your text box. You can adjust it and it will move the letters, generally letters and words. It's basically a text box. Over here in your tool options, while you have it, you get some options so you can check this box to use an editor. I don't really use this a lot. I don't really feel it's very useful for me in most cases. Anti-aliasing, I generally leave that on. Hinting, you can choose between none, slight, medium, full. Color. Click on this to change the color to whatever you want. So let's leave that on red for now. You can also change the color using this little colored box right here. Use that to change your color. Now it only changes what letters are highlighted. So as you can see, I've changed the color once, but none of the letters change color. I have to highlight them and actually change their color. Let's go with a blue. See, they changed colors. Now I can highlight different areas and have different words be different colors. Maybe blue, green. We can make this kind of a magenta. So these are words, different colors. Now, if this text box is like out of control, I can just click any one of the edges and it will shrink to the borders. Very simple, nice to keep handy. Now, changing the color in this box here with this color picker does not change the color up here. And this is kind of your default. So if I create a new text box, more text, it's going to be red because that is what the color is up there. Now another thing to keep in mind is sometimes, well, all the time I guess, this is linked to your foreground color. So whatever your foreground color is, that's going to be your default font color. So, and then if for whatever reason I type in here, then that color is applied to that text box and it is no longer affected by the foreground color itself. So if I have that selected, make this a dark gray, it's not affected. But if I change the color over here in tool options, it does change the color of the text that's highlighted in the box. It's really confusing. Honestly, this needs to be simplified, but this is how it works right now. Also over here, let's change this to black right now. You've got a couple other things. You've got indent. This only really matters if you've got, like, if you're doing like tabs and stuff. Also, if you have two or more lines of text, so here's line 1, line 2, doing more line spacing. So the higher this number gets over here, the farther apart these two lines will be spaced. So you can even go into negatives to make them more close. But generally, you don't need to mess around with that too much. Another thing is character spacing. So the higher this, is that what it's called? Letter spacing. Same difference. So the higher this number gets, the more spread out each letter will be from each other. And conversely, the lower this number gets, the more scrunched together they'll be. And now this applies to the entire text box, so you don't have to have any of this highlighted. You can't have a really spaced out more and then a really scrunched together text. That's just not how it works. You'd have to use a new text box. And then box settings, dynamic versus fixed. Language, I guess you can change the language, but since I'm English, we'll keep that there. And now this size font is in pixels. You can have it in typography points, so maybe you prefer 12-point font. That's really small, so that's about 50 pixels. But I prefer it in pixels because that's my personal preference. So that is a quick rundown on how the text tool works.